8 years. That's how long Tobias Marsh had lived in absolute silence, choosing solitude over the chaos of human voices. But as he was about to discover, isolation is nothing more than a fragile illusion, one that shatters the moment the past decides to come knocking. Thunder rolled across the open valley, a deep and menacing growl that shook the very bones of his ranch house. Standing at the window, Tobias watched dark clouds churn on the horizon, lightning crack in the distance, and then, like apparitions born of the storm, 3 figures emerged from the sheets of rain, women, walking steadily toward his front porch, their movements unhurried and purposeful. Tobias hadn't laid eyes on another human being in for months. Now, out of nowhere, 3 strangers were advancing toward his home, their soaked dresses clinging tightly to their bodies, their faces hidden by the curtain of rain. Something twisted inside him, not curiosity, not anticipation, but something closer to fear. No one ever stumbled onto his land by accident. He lived 50 miles from the nearest town. Visitors didn't just appear here. The first woman reached the steps of his porch. Even through the streaked window pane, Tobias could sense her certainty. She wasn't lost. She had arrived. Her knock came firm, 3 precise taps that rang out like gunshots in the quiet he'd so carefully built over the years. Tobias's fingers trembled as he reached for the door. He tried telling himself it was the cold. He knew better. Tobias Marsh. Her voice sliced cleanly through the roar of the storm. She knew his name. No one had said his name aloud in years. Not since he'd turned his back on the world and disappeared. Hearing it now, from the lips of a stranger, was like a slap that dragged him out of a long, heavy dream. She was striking in a way that felt deliberate. Dark hair plastered to her skin, eyes that studied him without a hint of hesitation. Behind her stood the other 2, one younger, deceptively innocent, with sharp eyes that hinted at something darker. The other older, quiet and still, observing him with the intensity of a predator sizing up its prey. "We need shelter," the woman at the front said, but her voice carried no uncertainty. It wasn't a plea, it was a statement. "The storm caught us between stops." Tobias forced his voice out, thick with rust. "How do you know who I am?" A slight smile tugged at the edge of her mouth. It chilled him more than the weather. "May we come in?" she asked, calm and composed. "There's something very important we need to discuss." The younger woman gave a little shiver, exaggerated, but never loosening her grip on the small satchel she held close. The older one didn't move, her eyes still locked on Tobias as though memorizing every feature. Thunder cracked again, loud and sudden, and in that moment, Tobias made a choice that would unravel the carefully woven cocoon of his solitude. He stepped aside and let them in. Just as the first woman crossed the threshold, he caught a fleeting expression on her face, a flicker of satisfaction, like a chess player taking the final piece. It had nothing to do with escaping the storm. Inside, the warmth of the fire quickly turned the trio from drenched travelers to something more composed. Their clothes steamed, their postures relaxed. What had seemed like urgency outside now revealed itself as quiet confidence. They moved through the house with an ease that made Tobias's skin crawl. "You have a lovely home," the woman said, peeling off her wet shawl. "Very secluded." She held out her hand. "Cora Lane," she introduced herself with a practiced grace. Her hand was too soft, too warm for someone supposedly caught in the storm. "And these are my companions, Ruby and Violet." Ruby, the youngest, offered a bashful smile that didn't touch her eyes. She still clung tightly to her mysterious bag. Violet gave a slow nod, her gaze drifting over every inch of the room, like she was mentally mapping it out. "Where are you headed?" Tobias asked, tension creeping back into his voice. But Cora had already moved to his kitchen, her steps unhurried, as though she owned the place. "Oh, just visiting some old friends," Ruby answered lightly, settling into his favorite chair, like it belonged to her. People in these parts carry such fascinating histories. The way she said it made his blood go cold. They weren't travelers in trouble. They weren't caught in a storm. They were here for a reason, and they were far too comfortable for his liking. "I think you've made a mistake," Tobias said, finally finding some firmness in his voice. "Whatever you're looking for, you won't find it here." "We already have," Violet said, her voice low but commanding. Something about the way she said it made the entire house feel tighter. 8 years is a long time to hide from the consequences, Tobias. The words struck like a physical hit. His throat went dry. The house, his safe haven, now felt suffocating. I don't know what you mean, he said. But his voice was losing conviction. Cora let out a soft, humorless laugh. The Merchants Bank, Silver Creek, September 15th. Does that ring any bells? The date cut through him like lightning splitting an oak. 8 years, 2 months, and 12 days ago. The day he vanished. The day he left behind wreckage and pain and chose to become a ghost. You remember, Ruby said, almost sweetly. We can see it in your face. Tobias took a step backward, eyeing the door, but Violet moved subtly, her stance shifting to block his exit. Not aggressive, just sure, practiced. Sit down, Tobias, Cora said gently, her voice soaked in finality, and he knew then this wasn't the beginning of a conversation. It was the beginning of something else entirely. We have plenty to talk about. Ruby's voice carried a strange calm, though the wind howled louder beyond the cabin walls. And with that storm getting worse, she trailed off, eyes fixed on Tobias. You wouldn't really turn 3 helpless women out into that kind of weather, would you? But Tobias was beginning to realize these women weren't helpless at all. They had tracked him down after nearly a decade of silence. They knew who he was, his real name, his past, and they hadn't come just to escape a storm. He stood motionless for a heartbeat, then slowly sank into the wooden chair across from them. His fingers trembled slightly, the weight of an old memory bearing down on him like the thunder rolling overhead. The Silver Creek Merchants Bank. He'd spent 8 long years burying everything about that place, and now the past had walked straight through his front door, wearing the faces of 3 women who somehow knew everything. You're probably wondering how we found you, Cora said as she made herself comfortable on the couch like it was her own. You did a good job covering your tracks. Tobias, new name, grew a beard, taught yourself how to disappear in the wilderness like some mountain ghost. Ruby reached into a small satchel and pulled out a worn photograph. Even across the room, he could see it clearly, his younger face, clean-shaven, dressed in a sharp suit, full of ambition and arrogance. A man who had once believed the world owed him. But faces are hard to forget, Ruby added in a sugary tone that barely masked the steel beneath, especially faces connected to pain. Violet leaned forward, her voice slicing through the room like a knife. 3 families, Tobias. 3 families shattered by what you did. His mind reeled. No matter how hard he tried to shut the door on those memories, they came crashing through. Now fraudulent paperwork, stolen accounts, the panic of being discovered, and his final choice to run instead of facing the wreckage he left behind. I told myself it was only money, he muttered internally, just numbers in a ledger. But he'd known better. He'd always known. Mrs. Henderson lost her farm, Cora said, her voice flat, unemotional. Her husband died trying to build that land into something. She ended up scrubbing sheets in a laundry house until her hands bled. The Morrisons, Ruby added. Her false sweetness disappeared like mist in sunlight. For children, lived in a tent through to freezing winters. The youngest didn't make it. She let the silence that followed carry the weight of what she didn't say. Tobias's stomach churned. I didn't know, he said hoarsely. You didn't want to know. Violet shot back. You took the money and vanished like a coward. And the 3rd family, Cora's voice softened, but the words hit like a bullet, was ours. The statement echoed in the room, heavy and final. Everything clicked into place. Their arrival wasn't an accident. This wasn't random. This had been building for 8 years. Our father trusted you, Ruby said, and for the first time, the pain cracked through her practiced expression. He invested every cent we had with you, and you stole it. He killed himself 3 months later, Violet said quietly, but with chilling precision. Couldn't bear the disgrace. Couldn't look his daughters in the eyes knowing he'd gambled their future on a fraud. Outside, the wind howled louder, but inside, everything was still. The storm seemed to wait for Tobias's reply. He couldn't speak. What apology could cover the devastation he'd left behind? What words could erase years of grief? What do you want from me? He finally whispered. Cora smiled, but it wasn't kind. It was sharp and cold, like the edge of a blade. Justice, Tobias, the kind you can't buy, and it's been a long time coming. She didn't say more, but her silence was more terrifying than any threat. Tobias swallowed, his mind racing. I have some money, he said desperately. Not a lot, but something. If that's what this is about, Ruby laughed, short and joyless. Money? You think this is about money? Our father didn't die over coins, Violet said with disdain. He died over broken trust, over shame, over you. Cora moved to the window again, watching the trees bend beneath the storm. Have you ever watched someone you love fall apart? Not from sickness, but from disgrace, from guilt. Our father spent his last days staring into space, whispering apologies to ghosts that wouldn't answer. Tobias felt a lump rise in his throat. I never meant to hurt anyone, he said. It was only meant to be temporary, just until I could. Until you could what? Cora turned suddenly, her voice fierce. Make it right. Pay it back. You had 8 years. 8 years to find us, to try. He had no answer. This isn't about restitution, Violet said. It's about reckoning, and you, Tobias Marsh, are long overdue. He looked at them, 3 women who had once been innocent daughters, now hardened by grief and purpose. Their father's pain lived in their eyes, and the storm outside. It was nothing compared to the storm they had brought with them. You never tried to make things right, not even once, Ruby said, her voice like ice. You never showed a hint of regret. Instead, you ran from it all, built yourself this quiet little hideout, and pretended none of it ever happened. Her words struck Tobias like fists. He had thought about the people he'd hurt, especially during those long, restless nights when guilt curled around his chest like a snake. But thinking wasn't the same as doing. His shame had become a prison, locking him into this life of self-imposed exile. What we want, Ruby said softly, is for you to understand what you really took from us. It wasn't just money, Violet added, her tone razor sharp. You stole our father, our sense of safety, our ability to believe in anyone ever again. Cora sat back down, her stare unwavering. And most of all, you took our belief that the world is fair, that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad ones. Ruby's soft smile returned, but in the flickering firelight, it looked like something out of a nightmare. So we came here to correct that. A wave of panic surged through Tobias. What do you mean? What are you going to do? That depends on you, Cora replied calmly. We've been following you for weeks, watching everything, your routines, your weaknesses when you sleep, where you go. His blood turned to ice. They'd been tracking him, hunting him, and he hadn't suspected a thing. The solitude he'd believed was his shield had made him vulnerable instead. You have a choice, Violet said, leaning back casually, as if they were chatting about the weather. You can finally face what you've done, or you can keep running just like always. A sharp clap of thunder shook the house, and in the stillness that followed, Tobias could hear the frantic beat of his heart. And if I choose to face it? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ruby tilted her head, studying him like a strange specimen. Then we give you the chance to make a real sacrifice, something that costs you as much as we've lost. But if you run, Cora added quietly, we'll make sure no one ever lets you hide again. Every town, every camp, every place you might find shelter, we'll show them exactly who you are. You'll be a walking wanted poster all the way to California. The wind howled outside, as if echoing his spiraling thoughts. Tobias knew the years he'd spent hiding were finished, one way or another. He stared into the flames dancing in the hearth, watching the wood hiss and crack. It felt like his entire life was about to go up in smoke. Across the room, the 3 women waited in silence, giving their words time to sink into the deepest parts of him. What kind of sacrifice? He asked at last, not looking at them. Cora glanced at her sisters before answering. Everything you have here, this land, this home. Your comforts, it's all going to the families you devastated. But that's not the real price, Ruby added, still smiling, her sweetness now laced with menace. The real price comes afterward. Violet leaned forward, eyes gleaming like an animal ready to pounce. You're going to walk into Silver Creek and tell everyone what you did, every lie, every stolen dollar, every person you destroyed. Tobias's face turned pale. That's suicide. They'll kill me, like you killed our father's faith in people. Cora replied. Without a shred of sympathy, Ruby's voice dropped to a near whisper, soft and cruel. The difference is, you'll still be alive to face the consequences. He wasn't given that mercy. Tobias stood abruptly and paced toward the rain-streaked window. The storm outside felt like nothing compared to what was unfolding inside. These four walls, and if I refuse? He asked, turning to face them. Then we do it for you, Violet said coolly. And our version won't be so generous. Cora pulled out a bundle of papers from her coat and laid them on the table. 3 years we've spent gathering these bank documents, sworn testimonies. Enough to end your life as you know it. Assuming the police reach you before the angry mob does, Ruby added, her voice laced with mock concern. He looked at them, really looked. 8 years ago, they would have been barely more than girls. Still full of hope. Now they were women sharpened by grief, hardened by purpose. They had dedicated their adult lives to hunting down the man who had broken theirs. Why? He asked, voice thick with confusion and something like awe. Why not just hand me over and walk away? Cora met his gaze. Because justice isn't just punishment, it's recognition. It's you owning up to what you did. Our father died thinking he'd been a fool, Violet said, her voice trembling. The least you can do is tell the world he wasn't. The storm outside finally began to ease, but a different kind of storm had taken root inside Tobias, one of reckoning, of choices that couldn't be undone. He had spent 8 years pretending to be a ghost, and now these 3 women were giving him the chance to be human again through pain, through loss, through exposure, but at the cost of everything. How long do I have? He asked. Cora's expression softened. Just a little, until sunrise. The hours that followed passed slowly, painfully. The sisters settled into the space, like they belonged there brewing tea, speaking in low murmurs, their presence both strange and eerily familiar. Tobias sat alone, drowning in his thoughts while the fire cracked and the wind howled around the old cabin. The storm outside might be ending, but the storm within him was just beginning. A storm churned within Tobias's mind, fiercer than the one fading beyond the window. Ruby had drifted to sleep in the chair, her face calm in the fire's dim glow. Violet stood near the window, watchful, while Cora remained intensely focused on him, as if bracing for him to flee into the night. You really believe confessing will bring you peace? Tobias asked into the silence. Living with the truth is better than dying with a lie, she answered, her gaze fixed ahead. He watched her through the fading light, glimpsing the young woman she might have been before grief forged her into this relentless seeker of justice. What happened to you after? He asked softly. Cora turned to him at last. After you ruined everything? We survived, but barely. I was 17. Ruby was 14. Violet was 21. Already a mother. The mention of a child hit Tobias like a blow. A child, he murmured. My son, Violet said quietly from the shadows. He made it to 2. Then winter took him. Hunger finished what the cold started. He's buried beside our father. Something inside Tobias splintered. Until now, he'd reduced his crimes to numbers, digits moved across screens, distant and impersonal. But hearing this, feeling the weight of what his actions had truly cost, made it real, human, devastating. I didn't know, he whispered. You didn't want to know, Ruby murmured without opening her eyes. It was easier to disappear than face the wreckage. You found me anyway, he said. It took 3 years just to learn your real name, Cora replied. 2 more to follow your trail west. Another year to be sure it was you. Thomas Miller, the man hiding in plain sight. You've spent 6 years chasing me. We've spent 6 years seeking justice, Violet corrected. That's not the same thing. Their words pressed down on him. 6 years of determination, of relentless pursuit. They'd shaped their lives around holding him accountable. He had shaped his around forgetting they ever existed. I have some money, he said suddenly. Not enough to repay everything. But we don't want your money, Cora cut in. It won't bring our father back. It won't bring Violet's boy back. And it won't return the years we spent clawing our way out of disgrace. Then what do you want? For you to stand in the town square of Silver Creek and tell the truth, Cora said, voice cold. To say your name, to confess what you did, To let the world see you pay the price our father never got to watch you pay. Tobias turned to the window. Pale light had begun to pierce the clouds. Dawn was coming inevitable, like the truth. In a few hours, he'd face a choice between two kinds of death, the slow, hollow one of endless hiding, or the swift and possibly brutal end that waited in Silver Creek. If I do this, he asked, if I come clean, what happens to you? The sisters exchanged glances. For the first time, they seemed unsure. It struck him that maybe they had never imagined a life beyond this moment. We live, Ruby answered, for the first time in years. We get to live for something other than revenge outside. The storm had faded, and Tobias knew the moment he'd been running from for nearly a decade had finally come. He stood at the window, the first rays of sunlight painting the valley in gold. It made the world look new, clean, and yet harsh in its honesty. The sisters stood silently behind him. He didn't have to look to feel their presence. 8 years of denial had led him here. Now, all that remained was the courage to choose. I'll do it, he said, voice low but steady. A breath escaped Cora's lips, one she'd been holding for years. Everything, he added. The confession, the public admission, everything. He turned to them then, and for the first time since they'd arrived, he felt something shift inside. Not peace, but a release, a bitter kind of relief. But I want to add something, he said. Violet raised a brow. You're not exactly in a place to bargain. It's not a demand, just something I want to give. He crossed the room to his desk and pulled out a battered leather journal. The binding was worn, the pages curled. He handed it to Ruby. Every sleepless night, every memory, every regret. I wrote it all down. My thoughts, the guilt, the calculations of what I'd taken, my grief for your father, even if I didn't deserve to feel it. Ruby opened the journal and saw page after page filled with his handwriting, confessions, apologies, attempts to reckon with the damage he'd caused. A chronicle of a man suffocating beneath his own remorse. Why? Cora asked, her voice softer. Because maybe, somehow, it shows I didn't forget, that I never pretended it didn't matter, that your father's life meant something even to the man who ended it. The journal moved between their hands, their eyes scanning the words. Their expressions shifted not to forgiveness, not yet, but to something that resembled recognition. A flicker of shared mourning, of heavy understanding. Cora closed the journal. We leave for Silver Creek at noon. Are you sure you're ready? Tobias looked around the room one final time, the haven he'd carved from shame and solitude. I've been ready for years. I just didn't have the courage to admit it. As they gathered their things, Ruby approached him again, not with blame, but with a strange, honest curiosity. What do you think they'll do when we get there? He exhaled, long and slow. Probably kill me. He shouldered a small pack, nothing more than he needed for the road ahead. But at least I'll die as myself, he said, not as a lie. The four of them stepped into the morning together, leaving behind the cabin like an old skin finally shed. Tobias Marsh wasn't hiding anymore. He was going to face what he'd done, to finally stop running. And for the first time in nearly a decade, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he'd earned the right to be called by his real name again. The storm was gone, and the path ahead stretched wide and clear and yielding, honest, and as unforgiving as justice itself.